The year is 168 BC. In the hills above Pydna, a king lays down his sword for the last time. Inside the royal tent, a girl of 14 clutches a pendant bearing her father's seal. Her lips are moving not in prayer, in memorization, her name, her bloodline. The words she will need to hold on to when everything else is taken. Outside, the Roman legions aren't celebrating, they're cataloging. Because Rome understood something no other empire had yet calculated. A dead king is a closed chapter. But his daughter, alive, broken, visible, she is a message that never stops being sent. What waited for her at the end of that road wasn't death. Death would have been simpler. What Rome built for the women of defeated kings was something slower, more deliberate, more total, and it has been hiding in the footnotes ever since. If you have ever read a history book and noticed that the women were missing, not dead, not absent, just quietly removed from the record, you are in the right place. This channel exists for exactly that. We go into the archives, the Roman magistrate ledgers, the triumph records, the footnotes that generations of historians read past without stopping. Every like, every subscription tells us to keep pulling. Because these women were meant to stay buried, and someone has to be the one who refuses to let that happen. She had heard the word before, triumph. In Macedon, it meant her father returning from a border skirmish, riding through Pella on a white horse while crowds threw flowers. It meant feasts that lasted 3 days. It meant safety. She was 14 years old, and she was about to learn what the word actually meant. The Romans had been building this machine for 500 years. Not the parade, the psychology. Every element of a Roman triumph was designed to do one thing: take the most powerful image a foreign kingdom had ever produced, its king, its queen, its royal children, and reduce it to something the crowd could laugh at. First came her father's gold, 40 wagons of it, stripped from the Macedonian treasury. The crowd cheered each cart, calculating how much their taxes would drop now that Perseus's wealth belonged to Rome. Then came the paintings, massive wooden boards carried by slaves showing Pydna burning, Macedonian soldiers dying in the mud, her father on his knees before a Roman general. People pointed and laughed. Children were lifted onto shoulders for a better view. Then came the prisoners. The crowd went quiet. Because burning cities were impressive, but a 14-year-old girl in golden chains, her father's own stolen gold crushing her wrists, still wearing royal white, still recognizable as the daughter of a king. That was the message. And the procession hadn't even reached the worst part yet. The morning after Pydna, Perseus woke up and he was no longer a king. He didn't know it yet. He was still breathing, still wearing his signet ring, still capable of forming sentences that began with "I command." But the battle had ended in 4 hours, and everything those 4 hours contained, 18 years of rule, the last independent Macedonian bloodline, the final chapter of Alexander the Great's legacy, was already being catalogued by Roman scribes on the other side of the river. He surrendered to Aemilius Paulus with his hands open. He expected negotiation, a treaty. The dignity one king extends to another in defeat. Paulus looked straight through him. His son Alexander, trained for statecraft, raised in a palace, heir to a kingdom 3 centuries old, was taken to Rome and placed in a workshop making ropes. Every morning he twisted fiber with hands that had been taught to hold a sword. He died there. The sources don't record when, just that he did. Just that he was gone. Perseus himself was dead within 2 years in Roman custody. The cause remains disputed. The result doesn't. His daughter outlived them both. She was 14. She was still alive. She still had her name. For now, they dressed her in her own clothes. That was deliberate. A conquered girl in rags meant nothing. But a Macedonian princess still wearing royal white, torn, bloodied, recognizable, that meant everything. The procession started at dawn at the Field of Mars. 4 kilometers to the Capitoline Hill. Rome had done this calculation precisely, long enough for the message to reach every pair of eyes lining the route, short enough that she couldn't collapse before they reached the end. First she heard it, the crowd before she saw them, a wall of sound bouncing off stone buildings, growing louder with every step until it stopped being noise and became something physical, something that pressed against her chest and made breathing difficult. The chains were gold, 40 pounds of it, her father's treasury, now wrapped around her wrists, her ankles, her neck. 2 guards walked beside her holding the chains up so the weight didn't pull her face first into the cobblestones. The crowd understood the symbolism immediately. They cheered louder. Rotten fruit hit her shoulder. Something wet landed on her face. A child pointed and laughed. His mother lifted him higher. She kept her eyes forward. That was the only decision left that belonged entirely to her. 4 kilometers, 1 million Romans. And at the end of the road waited a door she didn't yet know was meant for her. The procession ended at the Capitoline Hill, and this is where Rome revealed the final, most elegant piece of its machinery. At the top of that hill, every captured royal faced 2 doors. The first led to the Tullianum, a hole cut into the earth beneath the city, 6 meters deep, no light, no air. Rome's most dangerous enemies went through that door and were strangled in the dark while the celebration continued above them. Their bodies were dragged out and thrown into the Tiber. No burial, no marker, no record beyond a single line in a magistrate's ledger. The second door looked like mercy. It wasn't. Survival meant your name was replaced first, then your language. A Roman household had no use for Macedonian. Then your gods, the ones your mother taught you, the prayers you had memorized as a child, replaced with Roman rites you performed on command. Conquered royal women were distributed into Roman households as status symbols. Some were forced into marriages that legitimized Roman claims over their father's territories. Their children would be raised Roman, speak Latin, worship Roman gods, and have no memory of what their mother had been before she walked through that door. The Tullianum killed you quickly. The second door killed everything except your body. Perseus's daughter got the second door. What waited behind it would take the rest of her life to fully understand. 230 years after Perseus's daughter walked in chains, a different kind of trap was closing around a different kind of queen. This one had no chains, no crowd, no gold crushing her wrists, which is precisely why she never saw it coming. Berenice of Judea was brilliant, politically fluent, and had spent her entire adult life navigating the machinery of power. When Titus arrived in Jerusalem in 70 AD to destroy the temple and end the Jewish revolt, Berenice was already there not as an enemy, but as an ally, then as something closer. She watched Jerusalem burn from the Roman side of the line. She told herself this meant she was safe. She moved to Rome, dressed Roman, learned to speak Latin in the cadences the Senate preferred, attended dinners where she was the most powerful woman in the room. Titus was devoted. Everyone could see it. She believed devotion meant protection. Then Titus became emperor, and Rome reminded him, quietly but without ambiguity, that an emperor could not keep a foreign queen. The historians record his decision in a single sentence. He sent her away at once, against his will and hers. No chains, no arena, no execution. Just a door closing. After 75 AD, Berenice disappears from every Roman record entirely. No death date, no burial, no final mention. Rome didn't destroy her. It simply stopped remembering she existed. And what happens next makes Berenice's erasure look almost gentle. Berenice was erased quietly. What Rome did to others was not quiet at all. There is a poem by Martial Roman, Rome's most celebrated epigrammatist, a man who wrote verses for dinner parties and imperial celebrations, in which he describes a woman being bound to a bull in the arena. He writes it with the enthusiasm of a man reviewing a theatrical performance. The crowd loved it. He loved it. He published it. This was not secret. This was not shameful. This was scheduled entertainment on a Tuesday afternoon. The damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to beasts, was a formal legal sentence. It required paperwork. It had a budget line. Women of conquered royal and noble households were among those subjected to it, their status making the spectacle more valuable, not less. The higher the blood, the louder the crowd. Senators watched from covered seats with cushions and shade. Vendors sold food in the stands. Children attended. The woman in the arena, chained, bloodied, wearing whatever remained of the garments that had once marked her as royalty, was the afternoon's main event. Rome didn't do this despite knowing who these women were. Rome did this because of who they were. The message to every kingdom watching was precise and deliberate. No crown protects you here. But even this was not the worst of it. The worst was what happened to the women nobody ever named at all. Caesar's triumph of 46 BC is one of the most documented events in Roman history. Historians recorded the treasure carts. They recorded the paintings. They recorded the prisoners by name, Vercingetorix of Gaul, pulled from 4 years of Roman imprisonment specifically to walk in that procession before being strangled in the Tullianum that same evening. They recorded almost none of the women. The sources mention them in passing, and his family was taken. 4 words, a door closing on dozens of lives. The wives of Gallic chieftains who had fought Caesar for years. The daughters of Jugurtha, the Numidian king Rome hunted for a decade. Women who had run households, raised children, governed in their husbands' absences, negotiated with neighboring tribes, reduced to a subordinate clause in someone else's story. Demographic analysis of Roman triumph records suggests that for every named male prisoner, between 3 and 6 women and children entered Rome's slave economy undocumented, distributed into households, given Roman names, put to work. Within 1 generation, their children spoke only Latin. Within 2, no one remembered where they had come from. That was the system working exactly as designed, not breaking down, not failing, succeeding completely. Their names were never recorded because recording them would have meant acknowledging they existed as something more than property. But some of them refused to disappear without a fight. Some of them fought back, not with armies, not with political maneuvering, with the only weapon Rome could not confiscate: the choice of how to end it. Cleopatra understood exactly what waited for her in Rome. She had watched it happen to others. She knew the route, 4 kilometers, golden chains, a million screaming faces. She knew Octavian intended to parade her as the centerpiece of his triumph, the fallen queen of Egypt, proof that Rome had swallowed the last independent kingdom in the Mediterranean. She had spent her entire life outmaneuvering powerful men. She outmaneuvered this one too, just not in the way anyone expected. She chose the asp. Octavian got a corpse, history got a legend, Rome got nothing it actually wanted. She was not alone. On Trajan's Column, a monument Rome built to celebrate its own victory over Dacia, there is a carving that Roman artists included without apparently understanding what they were commemorating. A group of Dacian women, a chieftain's wife at the center, a vessel being passed between them, their faces calm, their decision already made. They took poison together rather than be taken alive. Rome carved their resistance into its own victory monument and called it a trophy. It wasn't. It was a defiance preserved in stone for 2,000 years. But resistance almost always came at total cost, and the women who didn't resist, who survived, paid a different price entirely. Livy mentions Perseus's daughter in a single subordinate clause, not even a sentence of her own, a clause. Plutarch gives her 3 sentences, sandwiched between paragraphs praising Aemilius Paulus for the elegance of his military strategy. Martial describes women bound to animals in the arena in a poem written to entertain guests at a dinner party. The poem has a punchline. This is where these women live in history, in the margins, in the parentheses, in the space between one man's story and another man's story, where the scribe's attention drifted and his stylus moved on. We almost lost them entirely. Not almost, we mostly did. The unnamed ones are gone completely. What remains are fragments so small that generations of historians read straight past them without stopping. But here is what those fragments actually contain, if you stop and look directly at them. A 14-year-old girl memorizing her name because she knew it was about to be taken. A queen vanishing from every record after a single sentence of dismissal. Women carved into a victory monument by the empire that defeated them, still visible 2,000 years later. Rome built the most sophisticated erasure machine the ancient world had ever produced. It almost worked. The woman in purple chains, screaming in a Roman square while a crowd cheered, was not an anomaly. She was policy, and she is still here.